If anyone's kept up with my many YouTube accounts over the years, one fact about me that I've never been shy about is my love for Disneyland. Say what you will about the Mouse House nowadays, but nobody can take away my Disneyland fun.
But there is no attraction as beloved or as iconic as the Haunted Mansion.
For those not in the know, the Haunted Mansion is a dark ride attraction that opened at Disneyland on August 9th, 1969. The ride has you taking an automated tour of a haunted house set in an old New Orleans manor, with a ghostly disembodied voice being your guide. As you survey many of the mansion's rooms, you come face to face with the 999 happy haunts that live there, and eventually have some hitchhiking ghosts follow you home. With its gothic decor, spooky atmosphere, and dark humor, the Haunted Mansion is a classic that everyone should take some time to ride when visiting the happiest place on Earth.
But what if I told you that in 2003, Disney Interactive actually released a video game based on the ride just a mere month before the untimely release of the live-action movie?
Dark spirits from the grave, come forth.
Don't you make no dark spirits come out while I'm sitting there. Wait till I leave before the dark spirits come out.
The Haunted Mansion.
Let's be honest here, most people generally don't know the Haunted Mansion got a video game because the negative reception of the movie followed it like a shadow. Wow, a ticket in 2003 cost $6.50? You don't see that anymore. Damn inflation. As unfortunate as that is, the game is more so inspired by the ride, though some set pieces from the film do make a brief appearance. No, for this title, developer High Voltage Software decided to craft their own original storyline for the game while paying homage to the legendary ride that inspired it. It's been over 16 years since the game was released, and while the game didn't set the world on fire with its critical reception, it's a game that holds a special place in my heart. So with the Haunted Mansion celebrating its 50th anniversary this year, I felt it was no better time than to revisit a huge part of my childhood. But is the game worth playing today? Or is it your imagination? As a bit of an aside, while I own a copy of the game, I won't be using the PlayStation 2 version to review it, solely for the reason that it kinda runs like garbage on my capture card with a ton of frame rate dips. So I'll be emulating the Gamecube version because it's the most stable and it's a lot easier for me to record. Figured I'd be transparent about that at the very least. If you're familiar at all with the story of the Haunted Mansion, you'll find that the story of the game is incredibly removed from the original ride. In the game, you play as Ezekiel Holloway, or Zeke for short, as he answers an advertisement in the newspaper looking for caretakers of a nearby mansion in the heart of Louisiana. As soon as Zeke gets there though, he's greeted by a group of friendly spirits in desperate need of help. Naturally, Zeke has the appropriate reaction to seeing a bunch of ghosts appear right in front of him. Sometime later, Zeke is taken to Madame Leota, a fortune teller with her head stuck inside a crystal ball, and one of the most iconic characters from the ride. Though in this game, she has a weird southern accent for some reason.
I, child, am Madame Leota, speaker of the spirit world, medium of the mysterious, and seer of things unseen.
Anyways, Leota tells Zeke that the caretaker job he applied for was just a ruse, and the real reason he's here is because the mansion has been taken over by a dark wizard known as Atticus Thorn, leader of the Order of Shadows and user of the dark arts. Long ago, Atticus came to the mansion in search of a mystical lantern known as the Beacon of Souls and used his power to corrupt the spirits who live there. It's not inherently stated what happened to the owners of the mansion, but Leota at one point says Atticus probably had something to do with it, seeing as he's the one who trapped her inside the crystal ball. With an army of evil spirits at his side, Atticus continues to roam the mansion, unaware that Leota is the one who possesses the Beacon of Souls. Hidden throughout the mansion, Leota entrusted 6 Chaos Emeralds, I mean Soul Gems, to the other friendly ghosts, and it's up to Zeke to retrieve them and strengthen the power of the lantern if he wishes to defeat Atticus and return the mansion to its original state. Of course, that's what I think Leota is saying, because every time Zeke is given an item, he does this while people are still talking.
Be used to battle any evil force.
All joking aside, I really like this setup. Trying to form a story around a ride like the Haunted Mansion is not an easy thing to do because the ride itself leaves a lot to be desired in the way of plot. So I appreciate the fact that the developers tried their best to come up with something original. It won't win any awards by any means, but it sure as hell beats the plot of the movie, that's for sure. After forcibly removing Leota from her table, we're finally set free to explore the mansion and are immediately thrust into combat. Using the Beacon of Souls, you can shoot out projectiles of light to keep the evil spirits at bay. After you flip the light switch on, you're then tasked with collecting a set number of shriveled souls that can be found in pieces of furniture throughout the room. By pressing the X button, Zeke will suck the souls into the lantern like a freaking Ghostbuster. If you collect all the souls in a room, you'll be rewarded with a piece of one of the 6 ghosts' death certificates. Collect all the pieces, and you'll receive a soul gem, thus making the Beacon of Souls that much more powerful. In order to progress throughout the mansion, you need a specific amount of shriveled souls to open the mansion's many rooms littered throughout. Think of it like the notes in Banjo-Kazooie or the Power Stars in Mario 64. The more souls you have, the more rooms you'll open. However, turning the lights on in each room isn't as easy as flipping a light switch. Some rooms get a little more creative with puzzles you'll have to solve, such as creating a trail of fire with some alcohol to light a furnace, or traversing through a maze with a moving wall. One minute you'll be dodging fireballs from a living fireplace, and the other, you'll be chasing floating candlesticks around to guide them back to a candelabra. In other instances, finding a route to the light switch is a puzzle in itself. For instance, in the foyer, you have to interact with this painting to bring it to life, which leads to you getting sucked inside, and from there, you can follow the road to another painting upstairs and exit to the light switch. One of the trippiest instances of this is in the pantry. After touching a few crooked paintings, you open up what looks like a portal to another dimension, and on the other side is a twisted version of the same room with lots of sharp teeth. After navigating towards a closed gate, you'll find a crank that you need to turn in order to open it. Travel back through the portal to the real world and flip the switch before the gate closes. Stuff like this is not original by any stretch of the imagination, but it's those moments of creativity and clever puzzle mechanics that keep the Haunted Mansion from getting stale. While most of the puzzles are pretty simple and easy to figure out, there were quite a few towards the end game that legitimately had me stumped at first. I had a really hard time in the sunroom. You have to position these mirrors so that the light can bounce off of them and power up this particular switch. It took me almost 30 minutes to figure out the solution, but once I did, that aha moment felt so satisfying. I also love the puzzle with the chessboard. You have to find a way to navigate around these rotating knight pieces and get to the end of the board without standing in the knight's line of sight. It can be really challenging, but it's nothing terribly difficult. That isn't to say every room in the house is a winner. I absolutely loathe the game room challenge early on when you get shrunk down to the size of a billiard ball. To win this stage, you have to wait for this floating cue stick to hit the cue ball and guide it so the other balls fall into the holes of the pool table. It's slow, tedious, and altogether not really that fun. But after you manage to hit all the balls in, you'll be rewarded with your first soul gem once you deliver the duelist his complete death certificate. The toy room can be a bit of a nuisance too. You're shrunk down again and sucked into this toy chest where Zeke has to navigate through a platforming challenge on top of a ball to get to the switch. The problem here are the physics. It really feels like the developers were playing Super Monkey Ball at the office or something, because rather than controlling Zeke, you're controlling the environment itself, which doesn't feel nearly as polished or fun as Monkey Ball is. Jumping on some of these platforms is a pain, and... oh. Or I could just say fuck it to the platforms and just go up this randomly placed ramp and bypass it altogether. Seriously, what were they thinking? I also gotta say, fuck the mausoleum. This stage is one of the few areas in the game based on the movie, which is a good choice since that was the only scene I actually remember being enjoyable from the film. Anyways, the mausoleum presents a gauntlet that you'll have 3 minutes to survive. This doesn't sound too bad at first, but then the game decides to introduce you to a giant gargoyle who infinitely spawns tiny skeletons and a fuck ton of other enemies all at once. If you're playing this game on higher difficulties, especially Nightmare mode, you're really gonna hate this part because it brings to light what I think is the Haunted Mansion's biggest flaw: the combat, or more specifically, the controls for the combat. In the Gamecube version, using the L and R buttons to shoot and lock on just doesn't feel as intuitive to me as using a PS2 controller, where the Beacon of Souls is mapped to the L1 and R1 buttons respectively. That controller just feels better to do rapid-fire shooting with. Now, don't get me wrong, shooting individual enemies is fine, but when the game throws multiple enemies on you all at once, the Beacon of Souls just feels insufficient to deal with crowds, and having to press the R button constantly just doesn't feel right. Granted, some of the soul gems towards the end of the game definitely help ease the difficulties of combat, but in the beginning that's not the case. Especially because the game gives you a lock-on feature that only deals with one enemy at a time. You can switch between targets with the C-stick, but that only gets you so far when 5 or more enemies are clustered together at the start of the game. The good thing is that if you have the lock-on button still held down after defeating an enemy, you'll automatically lock on to the next target nearest to you. While not game-changing by any means, I appreciate this little feature. To aid Zeke in his adventure, there are tarot cards that can be collected to increase your life count, voodoo dolls that will fully heal you, and some bravery tonic that help restore some of your health when it's running low. But to add to the frustration of the enemy placement, Zeke's health, or bravery meter as Leota likes to call it, decreases every single time that you enter a new room in the dark. So it's imperative you turn on the lights as soon as possible so you have a better chance of surviving. If you lose a life, you'll jump right back into the action, but that won't save you from the random moments the game decides to have an enemy appear from right behind you just for the sake of a cheap scare. This is especially frustrating because Zeke won't turn around to face the enemy you're locking onto fast enough to save you from getting damaged. For example, take a look at Luigi's Mansion. In that game, enemies definitely spawned from behind you, but I felt more in control of Luigi's movements with the Poltergust so that I could effectively deal with the threat. Here, it's almost impossible to not get hit, especially because later enemies can take a huge chunk of your health, And the game will sometimes spawn enemies from both directions, especially if they're enemies that can't be killed with single shots. Like those stupid living suits of armor. If you're walking down a hallway and these guys appear, you're fucked because these guys can only be defeated with charge shots. So when you get surrounded and try to navigate around them, be prepared to waste a lot of energy and lives trying to kill these things. Since the developers apparently weren't dickish enough, enemies can still spawn inside a room even after you've turned the lights on. This doesn't always happen, but one minute you could be looking around the room for shriveled souls, and the next thing you know, a giant spider or gargoyle will appear from out of nowhere just to delay your progress. Despite all of this, however, I wouldn't say that the game is inherently difficult. The boss battles, for example, are laughably easy. Every now and again, Atticus will show up to duel you, but his attack patterns are so telegraphed he goes down in seconds. Regardless, the sense of dread this game leaves you with as you traverse through the mansion never eases up. Which leads me to what I feel is one of the scariest moments in the entire game. Picture this, if you will. I was only 10 when this game came out. I had just gotten my first soul gem and started walking down the hallway when I see a woman, floating, a voice beckoning me. I decide out of pure curiosity to follow the voice, avoiding the grabbing hands that would pop out of these boarded up doors. I head into the kitchen to find the woman, and then this happens. This scene alone scared me so much I couldn't touch the game for days. It doesn't scare me that much now, but back then, it was a terrifying memory this game left me with. In fact, the most positive thing I can definitely say about the game as a whole is that it's oozing with great atmosphere and charm. Fans of the ride will definitely have a field day picking out all the subtle and not so subtle references strung throughout. Classic characters such as the hitchhiking ghosts, the singing busts, and the elderly caretaker all make cameos. Some background characters are even given larger roles, making them more fleshed out and memorable than before. Wow, fleshed out? I didn't even notice I wrote that.
I made a funny!
There's a sense of joy I get after completing a room and interacting with the ghost that inhabits it. I especially love the cutscenes that play after you present the ghosts with their death certificates. Each one has a wildly different reaction to how they died, and it evokes so much of the ride's dark humor.
Well, thank you so much for bringing that to me. Oh, rat poison, who'd have thought it? Oh well, I guess whatever doesn't kill you makes you stronger.
By the way, you're hearing that right. That's actually the voice of Russie Taylor, who unfortunately passed away just a few months ago. Rest in peace, Russie. Many thanks for all the wonderful memories that you gave us. Anyways, while we're on the topic of presentation, I really love the sound design in this game. Everything just sounds eerie and really helps add to the atmosphere. I wish the same could be said for the music though. Unless it's a rendition of grim grinning ghosts, there really isn't anything memorable that sticks out. Which is a shame because other than that, there really isn't anything in particular I find wrong in the sound department. The voice acting in particular is especially strong. You've got industry veterans like Bill Farmer, D. Bradley Baker, Corey Burton, and while I think the southern accent is a little strange, I think the actress playing Leota did a good job with the role. She's fun to listen to, especially since she's your guide throughout most of the game. Graphics-wise, the game looks okay, nothing particularly special in terms of art style. It's cartoonish enough that it doesn't stray too far from the art style of the attraction, but the strength of the game's visuals are more so in the small, subtle details you find throughout your adventure. One of my favorite little details is the portrait of Zeke in the upper left-hand corner next to your health bar. Every time you lose a certain amount of health, his face changes to reflect how scared he is. Seriously, look at that face. That is the face of a man who looked into the eyes of the devil and never recovered. Or it could be my friend Kyle's face, like when we went on Splash Mountain that one time.
Also, look at how these teddy bears twist their heads around on their own to follow every one of your movements. Ugh, this game is littered with unsettling details like this. I love it! Except the screaming maids, so those can go back to whatever hell they came from. Anyways, after you've collected all the soul gems and the shriveled souls, it's finally time to face off against Atticus. By the way, I love how the total amount of souls you have to collect is 999. That's cute, game. Very cute. Upon presenting the pirate with his death certificate, you'll be given a ring that can be used to open a secret door back in the foyer. Open it to reveal the most iconic room in the entire ride, the stretching room, portraits and all. This is a great Easter egg for fans of the ride, and I love that it made it into the final game. After squashing a few bugs, Atticus reveals himself and promptly steals the soul gems from the Beacon of Souls, leaving the lantern powerless. With the soul gems in hand, Atticus transforms into a giant bug. Really? A giant bug? That's the best they could come up with? Okay, to be fair, they did kinda hint at this throughout the earlier boss fights with Atticus, but it's still a pretty underwhelming final boss overall. As Atticus blabbers on about how he plans to use his newfound power to throw the balance of the afterlife and the land of the living out of whack, Zeke decides as a last-ditch effort to infuse Leota's crystal ball into the Beacon of Souls.
The final battle with Atticus is definitely the most challenging in the game, because you have to alternate between shooting his head and his stomach.
But once again, the lock-on mechanic will fight you every step of the way. If you're not quick enough to shoot the crystal, Atticus will unleash a devastating laser attack that takes off a huge amount of health. This was the point where I got my first game over, and I feel like a large part of it wasn't my fault. Though, looking back at the footage, I think my biggest issue was not using the C-stick to switch between the two, so those deaths could have been all on me. Anyway, shoot him down with the beacon 2 more times and Atticus Thorn will finally meet his demise. With Atticus and the Order of Shadows defeated, the restless souls of the mansion can finally move on to the afterlife. Zeke is congratulated by the other ghosts and decides to stay on as a caretaker of the estate before eventually deciding to finally pursue his career as a writer, thus ending the Haunted Mansion. Against all odds, the Haunted Mansion has aged remarkably well. It's a game that didn't need to exist, but it has a surprising amount of polish for a third-party title. While I wasn't crazy about the combat, I fell in love with the game's puzzles, exploration, and atmosphere. The game is bursting with fan service, and as a fan of the Disney attraction, it put such a huge smile on my face every single time I found something that referenced it. But even if you're not a fan of Disney, there's still plenty to like here. It's a great pick-up-and-play sort of game that feels just right in terms of length. This might sound like a bit of a hot take, but between this game and Luigi's Mansion, I personally preferred this one growing up. Something about its content just appealed more to me and made me want to replay it over and over again. Whereas I can count the amount of times I've played and completed Luigi's Mansion on one hand. That isn't to say Luigi's Mansion is a bad game or anything, far from it. I just think the Haunted Mansion has a lot more to be engaged with, especially for younger players wanting to get into horror games. If you're looking for a decent game to play this Halloween, try out the Haunted Mansion. It's not the most original game in the world, but it's a great tie-in game nonetheless. A little rough around the edges, but definitely worth your time, especially if you have little ones.
Hey guys, thank you so much for watching my review on the Haunted Mansion for the PlayStation 2, Xbox, and Gamecube. If you liked today's video, then feel free to hit that like button and subscribe for more. If you want to see more videos like this, feel free to let me know what you thought in the comments below. Until then, see you guys next time, and be good people.